loudly?
Are you trying to go right here? Sure.
We're waiting for District Attorney Clark. So.
There's no way I'm going to get this. Stand up until she arrives.
Right. I participated in the disastrous part.
Check. 987654321. Mic check.
Right here. Is this where you'll be able to hear everybody?
Yeah.
You've heard from all the lawyers, and you know some of the notables that are here, but we are especially honored that District Attorney Clark is here, and it's just going to be the District Attorney and Mr. Burton, and whichever of them wants to go first.
All right. Good afternoon. I'm glad to be here alongside my office's Conviction Integrity Unit and the Innocence Project, and of course Mr. Burton, to announce that the Honorable Stephen Barrett has just vacated the 1991 murder conviction and dismissed the charges against Huwe Burton. It's a day that Mr. Burton, I know, has long waited for, and I'm pleased that we are part of it, of the unburdening him of his conviction in the brutal killing of his mother back in 1989. Mr. Burton served 19 years in prison. Since his release in 2009, he has led an exemplary, law-abiding life. Throughout all this time, he has maintained his innocence, and today his name has been cleared, and so now he can continue with the rest of his life. I'm pleased that we were able to help restore his dignity and to help as he continues to heal and move forward. After a request by the Innocence Project attorneys, over a 2-year period, the Conviction Integrity Unit worked with them to conduct a comprehensive reinvestigation of the case, which drew headlines during a time of crack cocaine-fueled violence in the city. My office's Conviction Integrity Unit diligently reviewed the case, reviewed transcripts and case files, interviewed witnesses, and inspected the quality of the evidence used to convict Mr. Burton. Scientific evidence not available until recently has identified flawed interview techniques as well as other factors such as youth that increase the likelihood that a confession can be untrue. Based on this new expert information and on the inconsistencies and contradictions in the proof that was presented at trial, I no longer have the confidence that Mr. Burton's confession is reliable. Had this new evidence been presented, it is probable that the verdict would have been more favorable to the defendant. Now, police and prosecutors use different techniques to interview suspects and solve and try crimes, and we believe that Mr. Burton might not have been convicted using today's standards in law enforcement and the criminal justice system. I want to thank the Innocence Project for giving us the time to thoroughly investigate. Mr. Burton's case is a reminder that my office's Conviction Integrity Unit will review any applications and are ready to review any conviction where there is a legitimate concern about the reliability of a confession. I'd like to thank Bronx Supreme Court Justice Stephen Barrett for granting the motion by the Innocence Project attorneys to vacate the conviction and dismiss the indictment against Mr. Burton. I'd also like to especially thank Gina Mignola, Deputy General Counsel and Chief of my Conviction Integrity Unit, Assistant District Attorney Risa Gerson, Senior Investigative Counsel, and Assistant District Attorney Ryan Manzel of the Conviction Integrity Unit for their hard work on this case. And I especially like to thank Seth Steed. He's a former Assistant District Attorney in my office in the Conviction Integrity Unit, and he now is the Managing Attorney for the Criminal Defense Practice of the Neighborhood Defender Services of Harlem for his hard work on the investigation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Mr. Burton, just even though we're down here and we're asking you questions, don't look down because on camera then you're going to be looking down like this. So make sure you're looking at the cameras, not at us, okay?
What's this moment feel like?
What? Do you have a statement? You want to speak first? Okay.
Yeah. Well, first I want to thank my legal team. I want to thank the Bronx DA's office. I want to thank the Conviction Integrity Unit for all of their work that they put in to unearthing the truth. I'm grateful to be here today. There have been many days where it was a question, but I'm glad that we're here, and we still have so much more work to do because we know for sure that there are more Huwe Burtons out there, and we have to do something about that in the interest of justice. So,
As someone who spent 19 years in prison for a crime that you did not commit, what was that like for you? How did you maintain your sanity and your hope through all of those years that would get you to this point?
by not asking how. The way I was able to survive that is switching it to why. I had to find my why. Why is this happening to me? And what am I supposed to learn from it? And that was one of the things that kept me grounded and kept me balanced.
And
And
what
you
also
also had
mentioned
any
your
bitterness.
parents today.
Yes.
Just talk about their presence in your life, even in their absence, if you will.
Absolutely. Well, as I said earlier, my mom gave me a set of values and principles. My dad, the same thing. A lot about patience and perseverance and pressing on. My dad gave a lot of those things to me. Even while I was in prison, every facility that I was in, he was always there, always made sure that I had and that I never wanted for anything. I never knew a better example of a parent than mine.
And you mentioned, though, that your mother was disrespected by the law. Can you elaborate on that?
What I mean by that is when my mother was murdered, the investigation was 48 hours. That's what I mean by being disrespected by the law and law enforcement. Had they taken a longer look, a more analytical look, they may have not rushed to judgment.
Why
do you think this happened to you? Say at a time did you ever think about that? Looking back now on this journey, why did this happen to you? Why do you think it did? I believe that was a temperament of the time in which we lived in. That was just the temperament. That was just the time. That was the day.
You said today, I believe I heard you correctly, that this is the first time you felt safe in court. Can you expand on that?
What I said was when I had Mr. Kunstler as my attorney, it was the first time that I felt safe in a courtroom.
What will you do now?
I'm getting ready for a marathon now. I'm ready for the marathon.
Is there anything now that, I mean, obviously you've lost decades, but is there anything now that can restore some sense of justice for you in addition to this expunging?
Being a part of finding others who have gone through something similar that I've gone through.
So now you want to be able to help other people, like through the
Absolutely.
Innocence Project?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And you're going to be living in the Bronx with your family now? You have a lot of family, or?
I have a lot of family. No, but I'm not in the Bronx anymore.
Oh, okay, all right. So now, this is your first day, I guess, of real freedom?
Yes.
So what are you going to do when you leave this courtroom today? What are you going to do?
I'm going to sit down and process it. It's a lot to process because of the amount of time that I've waited for this day and even the anticipation and the lead up to it. I'm going to just sit and just process it.
When the judge said those words today, it appeared that you got a little emotional. Can you tell us what you were thinking?
It just felt like a weight was officially lifted.
And for anyone else who's behind bars right now for a crime they didn't commit, your message to them is what?
Don't stop. Don't give up. don't stop. Continue to fight. Don't lay down. The moment you lay down, that's when it's over.
Will you seek any kind of compensation, any sort of restitution?
I'm not really thinking about it right now. Hasn't really been on my mind like that, so I just really want to process it today.
And there was conversation, I think mentioned by Mr. Scheck, there was testimony in court about a conversation that the district attorney and you had together, an interview. Can you all elaborate on that? And what was said then? What was said?
We're referring to
When the district attorney interviewed you.
I want to say, I think that was, well, let's bring him in here and let's talk to him. Let me put a face on what I'm reading and what I'm seeing. I'm assuming. Ms.
Well,
Clark?
and I did want to have the opportunity to meet him and to hear it from him, from his mouth. Even though we had a long investigation, I still thought that was necessary for me to really, before I made my decision, have the opportunity to meet Mr. Burton.
Did that have
before
an
I decided.
emotional effect, if I may?
Well, it has an effect. I mean, it's a very serious thing. You know, this is not an easy job. You know, it's not an easy decision to do something like this. But you know, I believe in justice, and I wanted to do what was right. You know, and doing what's right is doing it even if nobody's watching you. You have to make sure that you do it. And part of what I thought would be justice in this case was to make sure that I heard from the person who had been accused of the crime and convicted of it.
And Ms. Clark, are there plans to look at other cases that these three detectives handled?
Well, the Conviction Integrity Unit is there to look at any cases that come to us or anything that we know about where there may be a probability or legitimate concerns about the reliability of confession. So we're open to that.
But will there be an active review, like an active going back through the cases over the years?
We're going to review. We're going to review.
And what about the prosecutors involved? Are they still employed with the
No,
state's office?
no.
Do you feel that because of all this, you lost the opportunity to pursue another promising suspect? We did hear a lot about Mr. I couldn't hear the overflow, Green or Reed.
Did I feel like we lost the opportunity?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, this happened some 20 years ago. I was not the assistant assigned, but in doing the reinvestigation, it became clear that there was a viable suspect who was involved, and that person was never, you know, necessarily brought to justice or charged with the crime.
It turns out that Mr. Green was killed in a lover's triangle before Mr. Burton's trial, so only his videotape statements and recorded statements were put into evidence. I commend you to the district attorney's recommendation for dismissal because the analysis that they did of the contradictions in Mr. Green's statements is, from our point of view, quite thrilling.
When did he die?
Oh, he died before the trial. It was,
1951.
yeah.
What happened to those three detectives?
They are retired from NYPD.
Do
you get charged for something like this, the detectives?
Well, you know, listen, what happened back then, what they did was not necessarily wrong. That is the way things were done then. The science and things have developed over the years so that now we know that those techniques are not good to produce reliable confessions. So it's not necessarily that they did anything wrong. For 1989, that was standard practice for NYPD. That's how they did it. But now we know better.
Just to clarify, your father passed away
2005.
2005.
Anything else you want to tell us about going forward? You said you're looking forward to running a marathon.
Yes.
What else?
Really just getting back into doing music. Getting back into doing music.
Is that the New York City Marathon coming up?
Yes.
This coming November?
November, yes.
And
So you really do want to run the New York City Marathon? I thought you were talking like the marathon of life.
No, I've actually done it already. I did it in 2016, so I haven't been training, so I'm gonna do it again for this year. Yeah.
And at various points in court, though, you shed a tear here and there. Can you elaborate a little more about what that was?
to hear that there's been public acknowledgement of what was done to me, I think that's where I get a bit emotional.
Anything else?
Well, we're actually, you keep on asking what he's gonna do. We actually have reservations for lunch in an undisclosed location. So,
That's a good ending.
yeah, then unless you have questions, you can, anyone else? Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very
Thank you.
much.
Linda.
Everybody gets their hug.
We're just trying to get this. Sorry, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you a card.
There's handouts?
Well, yeah.
It's a really nice thing to see. I was a young little associate on this.